Caesar, I see that you're signed in. This is Mrs. Cost speaking. Can you hear me okay?
Might be on mute.
If he is, it's on his end.
Okay. Yeah, we can't hear you, Caesar.
I've heard if you're calling in with a phone, try using *6.
Hi, this is Sal. It's not Caesar.
Oh, hi, Sal.
Hi, Sal.
Hello, Sal.
Yeah, I tried doing off the Google thing and I'm asking to join, but no one's responding.
McKenna, are you able to hear us?
Yes.
There's Caesar.
Where are you, Caesar?
He's on mute, but it looks like he's there.
Hi, Caesar.
Okay.
Hello.
So you see over in the corner of the screen right now, we had a picture of you up there on the slides so that when the slides go through, if you couldn't get your video on the screen, but you see your face when you swear in. Okay?
Okay.
Okay, sweetheart. And McKenna, you're here as well. I know that.
Saw McKenna.
Yeah.
All right, we'll call the meeting to order at 5:04. We will do a roll call to make sure that we have a quorum. Jennifer Nolan.
Here.
Roxy Finer.
Here.
Heather Patchell.
Here.
Sarah Eager.
Here.
Sal Santa Maria. I know he's here. Thanks, Sal. Frank Treglia. Matthew Van Ormer. David Colavecchio. Okay. I think 5 members is a quorum, correct?
Are you? Can you hear me?
Oh, yes, Frank.
My screen is just blank, so I don't know what's going on.
Okay. All right. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag
United States of America and to the
Republic
republic for which it
which
stands,
it stands, one nation,
under God,
indivisible.
indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. I would like to, before we start the meeting, I would just like to thank Mrs. Cost and the members of the district reopening committee for all the hard work that they've been doing over the past couple weeks to work on, the process of how we may reopen in the fall. So I just wanted to thank you all for that.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. First item on our agenda is going to be the swearing in of Cesar Velez, who will be one of our new student representatives for the 2020 school year. So Cesar, do you solemnly swear that you will faithfully discharge according to law your duties as student representative for the Thomaston Board of Education to the best of your ability, so help you God? If so, please respond, I do.
I do.
Congratulations and welcome to the board.
Thank you.
Okay. Moving on to agenda item number 4 is the notice of waiver on the bid requirements per policy 3320. And the board should have received the email from Mrs. Cost this week regarding this item, and I will turn it over to her to discuss.
Okay, thank you. First, congratulations, Caesar, and also to our student reps that are on the call. Remember, if you have questions, you have the right to speak up just like a full bona fide voting board member. So if you do have any questions about what I'm presenting tonight, please don't hesitate to ask. So I sent a letter to the Board of Ed about a policy that we have and how I'd like to waive the policy, which is explained in that letter, but I would like to read that section of the letter for the benefit of those that haven't read the letter yet, or those in the public who are not aware of the letter. I intend to waive the bid process to swiftly purchase and install web cameras in classrooms across the district in an effort to provide equitable access to instruction for students who may not be able to return to in-person instruction in the 2020-2021 school year due to the conditions caused by COVID-19 and beyond. I also intend to waive the bid process to swiftly purchase covers in an effort to minimize the damage that may be caused by the daily carrying of Chromebooks to and from school to ensure uninterrupted access to online instruction in case of an emergency COVID school closure. In a nutshell, the policy is that if we are going to spend more than $10,000 on something that was not originally budgeted for, that I would have to go out to bid. And because we would like to have these web cameras, as well as the Chromebook protective cases, purchased in a timely manner so that they can all be installed and utilized come August when the students come back to school, we used a policy that allows me to minimize the number of vendors that we can solicit to a pre-qualified list. In other words, we're using people that we know, vendors that we already have either services or goods that we've purchased from them. And those vendors are going to provide us with what you're going to see on the next two slides. So Stacy, if you can move to the next slide, I'd like to show what the webcam installations will look like. So there are going to be 46 classrooms in the district that are going to be receiving the camera, that eyeball camera that you see on your screen now in the white square with a microphone and the appropriate wires. They are going to be, this camera is going to be attached in a way so that the bright link or the short throw projector that's in every room will be the defining point of what the camera can or cannot see. In other words, the camera will not be facing the students. It will be facing the whiteboard that the projector projects onto, and the teacher would be able to begin their lesson or tune into to this camera area throughout the lesson and record themselves, so that if a student were to have to stay home, either because they are ill or because their parents have made a choice to keep them home because of COVID, then the teacher would be able to simultaneously instruct the students that are in front of him or her, and also record that portion of instruction where they're standing in front of that camera and push that recording out online so that the students at home would be able to hear and see what the students in person hear or saw at the introduction or that point in the instruction. There are 8 classrooms in the district that do not have the equipment currently to accept these types of cameras. So those 8 classrooms are going to receive cameras, but they need another piece of equipment. So they're going to receive a touch board, and that touch board serves like a very large television. It's a 65-inch large piece of equipment that's mounted on the wall. So the two costs that you see there, the $56,000 and the $32,000, are covered in the 1920 budget. We ended the budget year with a surplus because of the school closure. We did not have to pay the daily rate for transportation because transportation was not running, and we negotiated a lower rate in the contract during that school closure period. So the savings that we have reaped from that, we are putting toward improving our distance learning opportunities and also allowing for that simultaneous teacher-created lesson live that becomes a recording later. And I also want to emphasize too that even long after COVID, these cameras would be able to be used for many different reasons. We have students who have traveled, they're in competitions, they're competing gymnasts or competing dancers, and they need to be absent from school for long periods of time. They would still be able to tune in if we have this equipment available. Students who might be suspended from school would be able to tune in to their classrooms instead of having work delivered to them. So this is something that, while it is being purchased for the purpose of enhancing our ability to provide distance learning to those who may opt out of in-person instruction, it is also a very sound purchase that's going to improve our ability to instruct students who might not be in school in the future well beyond COVID. So I wanted to bring to the board out loud in a public forum this waiver that I'm requesting, because the amount of money is large. And I wanted to assure the board that we have funds from the closeout of the 1920 school year that would allow this to occur. Stacy, could you show the next slide, please? This is what the Chromebook cover looks like. It's sort of like a framed OtterBox style Chromebook cover. And what it'll do is it will make the transport, the daily transport of our Chromebooks. So they are $31 a piece. They were originally $50 a piece, and our staff was able to get educational pricing as well as other lower pricing because of our current relationship with the vendor. So this would get us a cover for every Chromebook in the district, including those that are used by staff. So it would be for all of our students and all of our staff. Currently, only grades 7 through 12 bring home their Chromebooks. And they do that because we ask them to sign a waiver and pay a fee so that insurance can be covered on those Chromebooks if there was to be damage. Every student now will need to take these Chromebooks home, and we need to now treat Chromebooks as if they are textbooks, where they have to go back and forth as needed. So we can no longer limit it only to 7 through 12. We can no longer make it a participation only through fee. We have to protect this piece of equipment in a different way, and we have to make it for all students. So that's why I'm asking for the waiver process on this, because this could take anywhere from 40 to 60 days to have the order fulfilled and reach us. So again, I'm asking you in a very public forum to accept my request to waive the bid process so that we can move quickly to get these two purchases taken care of so that they'll be ready for the fall. Thank you.
We have a motion to vote on approving and accepting the waiver on the bid requirements.
Make a motion to vote on accepting the waiving of the bid requirements.
Do we have a second?
I will
Heather
second it.
Patchell, second.
Thank you. Is there any discussion on the motion?
If I could just interrupt Caesar, since you're new to this process, if you had any question about what I've just presented, when we go into discussion, that would be the time that you could ask. So I'm not asking you to ask a question if you don't have one. I just wanted you to understand the process.
Okay.
Francine, this is Heather. I do have a question. Those students that didn't ask for a Chromebook, so to speak, during distance learning, is it still available to them when school starts up again? Like my kids use their personal Chromebooks, but my daughter's going into 7th grade. So, I mean, how is that going to work? How are we going to handle that?
When we shut down, we purchased enough Chromebooks so that every student in the district could have a Chromebook. And so any student who has a Chromebook now will continue to have one, and any student who doesn't have a Chromebook now will have one available to them. We would strongly encourage our students to all use the same Chromebook that the school issues, as opposed to bringing their own device.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you.
This is Roxy. I have a question. Are these covers good for all of the type of Chromebooks that we are currently allowing the students to use that we provide? And a follow-up question is, if this is going to become like textbooks now, are we doing away with the pay to allow the high schoolers to use the Chromebooks? And what if the high schoolers already have a cover that they have on their Chromebook? Thank you.
Okay, first off, this Chromebook cover would be one that would fit whatever Chromebooks we have in our possession. That was the goal, is to make sure that the covers fit the Chromebooks, because I believe we have 3 different styles of Chromebook that we're working through, because every year we replenish Chromebooks based on their warranty. So our IT staff, they want to make certain, of course, that what they've ordered matches what we have in stock. So they will fit the Chromebooks that we have. And then the answer is yes, Roxy. It would be unfair to continue to collect $50 a student in grade 7 through 12 to ask for permission to bring home their Chromebook when everyone else in the district is going to have to bring home a Chromebook. And furthermore, if we are covering these Chromebooks with these cases and not their own personal cases, then these cases offer a different level of security for us, a different level of protection for us. So it would make sense that we would have fewer reports of damage because of the type of cover that this one is, as opposed to like a neoprene cover or a cover with a little zipper around it that you just slide into. This is called an always on cover. It never comes off the Chromebook.
Thank you.
Yes.
Is there any other discussion or questions?
I would like to bring up the point that the funds that we have collected over the years from grade 7 through 12 to take the Chromebooks home, those funds have been used year over year to either repair the Chromebooks that were out of warranty or to purchase, to offset the purchase of new Chromebooks. We don't really collect that much money where we can guarantee to buy all the new Chromebooks every year. We pretty much have to put that into the budget. But what we are now in the middle of is a period where every Chromebook that we have is under warranty. And the timing of that warranty has been extended from a 3-year duration to a 4-year duration. So we will be able to continue on our purchasing plan to keep our Chromebooks in warranty so that if there is damage, we would not need that fund that we were creating with the $50 per user to make the repairs to the Chromebooks, because everything will be under warranty going forward at the same time.
Francine, this is Sarah. I have a question. Are you going to collect all Chromebooks then before school starts in order to get them all these new protective cases?
So our IT staff has the new Chromebooks that we've purchased that are under warranty, that these covers will go on. And then any Chromebooks that we still need to use that are under warranty, that are out there being used by our students right now, would have to be collected at the beginning of the school year. This cover would be put on it by our IT staff and then returned to the student. There are a good number of Chromebooks out there that are not under warranty that we will be simply collecting and replacing with a warranted Chromebook in a cover.
Okay, thank you.
It's Roxy again. Did we budget for the Chromebook fees in the 2021 budget?
We don't typically use it until it's in a lump sum. And we knew that we were taking Chromebooks out of the budget because we were going to pre-buy them in March. So if it is in there, we don't need it because we're not buying Chromebooks because we've pre-bought them. So I can check that just to be certain, but I'm pretty certain that we don't offset with very much money because it's usually held for other reasons, like I said, a big purchase or repairs.
Thank
But I
you.
will check, Roxy, and I'll have Todd, for the public, Todd's our business manager. I'll have Todd report that out when we have our meeting on Wednesday of the budget committee.
Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. Is there any other questions or comments or discussion on the motion? Okay, I'm going to ask if there's any opposed to the motion. Are there any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, the motion carries. The next item on our agenda is the the Adapt, Advance, Achieve Connecticut's plan to learn and grow together. And I will again turn it over to Mrs. Koss for this presentation.
Thank you. The state of Connecticut put out an executive summary and a series of key points last week about the school reopening plan for the fall. But then they followed that up with a 50-page document that they released on Monday. I'm not going to go through that entire document with you now, but I wanted to highlight some points that are going to, I hope, provide clarity, because there's some mixed information out there in the press, and I want to be certain that you're getting the information directly from the documents and that you understand that information from its source. So first off, the first statement in the executive summary is what's highlighted there. It looks, I believe it looks kind of green on your screen. It's supposed to be a highlight of yellow, but I think the blue black background is turning it a little green. Thank you, Stacy. It says that all students, all districts will return to the schoolhouses for full-time instruction beginning in 2021. So that is their intention with this plan. The assumption is that we will have a series of conditions living in this pandemic period whereby we can safely return to school without having a hybrid model or a half day, half week, every other day kind of hybrid circumstance. All children will report to school all at the same time. Next slide, please, Stacy. The other points that they were making in the plan that they emphasized quite a bit, which I think is important for them to emphasize, is to maximize social distancing. And I'll keep going back to that terminology, that maximize of social distancing. They are not demanding that students sit 6 feet apart anymore. Originally, the state was saying that for us to return to school, we would have to position desks so that they'd have to be 6 feet apart. And in order to do that in Thomaston, we would definitely have to have rotating groups of students coming in and out of the building, because our typical class, if we were to say it's 18 to 24 children in a classroom, you could see that a typical 18 to 24 group of students would end up being 3 or 4 separate groups of students with 6 feet distancing. So what they're asking for is a maximizing of social distancing. And that's why they include that little purple figure there saying that we have to have face coverings, because they are assuming that because we are not shrinking the size of a class and having everyone sit 6 feet apart, that at a minimum we need to cover our noses and our mouths with a cloth face covering. There's also a lot of emphasis in this plan about frequent hand washing and use of hand sanitizer, which the district will make certain is available. If a classroom doesn't have a sink, there'll be hand sanitizer available there. If there are sinks, there may be still hand sanitizer, but the sink will be there, and that's what's recommended is frequent hand washing. And then, of course, enhanced cleaning and disinfection. That is going to be defined in our plan, but that is something that they're asking for. However, they're not explaining yet in the plan what enhanced means. I don't know if enhanced means a certain type of cleaning protocol or a duration or frequency, but we will find out as the weeks go by, because the State Board of Ed and the State Department of Ed have said that they're going to continue to provide us with clarification. The next slide, please. So you see here, their plan is to cohort classrooms as best as we can. They are strongly encouraging that we cohort grades K through 8, and they encourage us where feasible grades 9 through 12. I'll explain cohorting. What the state is asking us to do is to have students remain together in similar groups with limited change for as long as we can during the school day. So, for example, if you are in Mrs. Koss's first grade class, you would stay with Mrs. Koss in her room as much as you possibly can all day, not commingling if possible with anyone else. However, the reality is that our students do commingle. They commingle on the bus. They commingle when they enter the school building, because we are not having the students enter in a particular way to get into the classroom. They have to enter through a main entrance. So it would be encouraging us to minimize mixing of groups. So that's the cohorting model that they're asking for us to consider. The reason why they're offering the where feasible option instead of strongly for high school is because they've come to the realization that most of our high school students don't travel as groups. You don't have, freshman homeroom 10 walking from classroom to classroom, taking math and then science and then social studies. They are mixed based on class choices and placement in those classes. So that's why they're saying where feasible there. Again, there's maximized social distancing, and again, the facial coverings, again, the frequent hand washing, and again, the enhanced cleaning. On the buses, originally the plan said that we are mandated to have monitors on the bus to insist that children, and to not assist, but insist that children keep their masks on while on the bus. The impractical side of that is when the child doesn't keep their mask on, what is it that one does with that child on the bus other than reprimand them verbally? They can't physically return the mask to the child's face. And we also don't want to upset the child to the point where they arrive at school and they are not able to think straight because they've been so taxed on the bus. So what they've decided to do was encourage monitors on the bus. What I would like to do, which we're going to work on, is some education as to how we're going to wear masks and how we have to behave on the buses. But they did get rid of social distancing on the bus for our return to school. You see there it says no spread, full capacity. Originally, they were saying we had to sit children 6 feet apart, which would have given us about 10 children to a bus, which would have had to increase our fleet somewhere between 4 and 8 times, which is not only impractical money-wise, but it's impractical because there aren't enough buses that are available to be used. So right now they're saying full capacity. Next slide, please, Stacy. This slide, I wanted to point out the arrows at the bottom. This is an important bit of overlap with what the CDC says. So the CDC had recommended what they call the lowest risk plan, the more risk plan, and the highest risk plan. And the state is using something quite similar. So what the state is asking us to do right now is send them a plan for the green arrow, which is full in-person instruction, where they're assuming that the spread of COVID is contained or that a vaccine exists and we have all taken that vaccine. If there is to be a spread in our community, an indicator of COVID, either a contact indicator or an actual positive case, then we would be rolling backwards through these arrows, depending on how it's directly or indirectly affecting our students or staff. So the plan that we're going to send to the state is going to address how we're going to behave in these different conditions. However, it's going to be rather basic, and what we will be doing here at the local level will be asking the board to contemplate what they can afford so that we can do a proper plan for all of these different stages. And that's not going to come for a little bit, a couple of weeks, at least maybe 3 from our local level. Next slide, please. Here, I just wanted to point out to you that we have to submit this plan. Our local district plan has to be submitted to the State Department of Education, but they're not going to approve the plan. They're just going to warehouse the plan. Their purpose for the plan is to have it on hand so that if a district were to call them and say, hey, I'm really stuck on this particular indicator, or I'm really stuck on this plan segment, the state would then be able to pull our plan and have it handy so that they can respond to our questions. There is no approval process from the state. However, we do need to share our plan with the Torrington Area Health District so that they can approve it. And then we will send it to the state. Next slide, please. Here it's emphasizing, again, that we have to submit a plan for fall reopening, but we also need to be prepared to modify that plan. They do emphasize throughout this plan that they would like us to identify gaps and develop action plans for reopening that have to do with inclusion, equity, and access to all learners. And that is really the crux as to the purchase of the cameras that I asked for earlier in the meeting, allowing for all learners to have access to instruction, albeit it's not exactly the same as in-person versus distance. It is better to know that we can give an almost synchronized instruction to our students who may have to stay home either due to illness or due to parental concern for returning them to school. Next slide, please. Here, I wanted to point out to the board that the state has asked for a designee to be called the COVID-19 Health and Safety Compliance Liaison, and they're suggesting that it be a school nurse. I have already approached my most senior school nurse and asked if she would be interested in the position that has no job description yet from the state. She has happily accepted, and we shall see what will happen. But I will be offering a stipend for that because it is an additional duty for that employee. So I wanted to give the board that information. We are going to treat that stipend, we're in negotiations on it, but we're going to treat that stipend in a way that's similar to other stipends in that union, so that it's a fair stipend and mimics something that has been past practice. Next slide, please. This is also emphasizing maximizing space between students and teachers and social distancing. So I wanted to highlight that for you. They are making some suggestions in the plan that if you were to seek out ways to maximize, they were encouraging us to use our gymnasiums to spread out larger classes and hold classes in our gym instead of holding gym class in our gym. And we have not, as a district committee, come to any conclusion on that yet, but suffice it to say, if we are coming back full force, we would not need to spread into any of the larger spaces in order to provide instruction. And then they're again looking at, if you look at the daily operations at the bottom, they're looking at what they're calling now stable cohorts when feasible. Again, there's a lot of talk in the media about kids have to travel in groups and that they can't separate. The reality is they come in separated, they walk through the building mixed, they exit mixed and onto their buses mixed or out to their parents' vehicles mixed. So the best cohorting we can do is to maximize the duration of cohorting, and otherwise we would not be able to truly cohort because we can't have children all arriving in the same vehicle for Mrs. Cloth's homeroom, for example. Next slide. This is the child nutrition component for our food service. It basically says that you still have to follow the National School Lunch Program if you expect to be reimbursed. So we have our food service director who is on top of this. So I'm not at all worried about this. That's why there are no highlights here. Next slide, please. Here's more about transportation, again, highlighting full capacity on the buses, wearing of face masks. The third bullet under both low and moderate, the third bullet and the fourth bullet, respectively, under low and moderate transmission risk, we have not grappled with at the district level. If you look at it, it says that we need to load the bus from the back row to the front. That would mean we pick up child number 1 at bus stop number 1, and they walk past the driver to the last seat at the back of the bus. And then they continue to fill the bus going to the second to last seat and third to last seat until the very last child is picked up who would sit at the front. That is not our habit here in Thomaston. We like to keep our little ones closer to the front, especially our little ones who are new to school. So we are looking at what ways we can manage that component of the plan, because loading and putting a 5-year-old at the back of the bus with no one to assist them is not conducive to the climate that we like to have on our buses. Next, please. We are to ensure that students are engaged in the proper health practices and protocols. So again, we're going back to those same points of washing your hands and using social distancing and wearing face covering. So again, it's just a reiteration. There are some things here in the bottom bullet that will affect our budget. For example, hand sanitizer, we have some now, but not ample supply to allow for it to be used the level of frequency that is expected. Paper towels is another example. We have some of our bathrooms that have air dryers for your hands. We would have to consider whether we think that that is safe or not safe to continue allowing for air dryers to work in bathrooms, or if we should replace them with paper towel dispensers, which we would also have to consider the cost of the towels, as well as the cost of maintenance on some of our toilets, because since we've had the hand dryers, we haven't had too many toilet clogs with paper towels. So we're thinking about even those kinds of levels of micro understanding of what we're doing when we make these decisions. As far as pedal trash cans, most of our trash cans are not lidded, so we're not too worried about that. Next, please. Here for health practices and protocols, they continue talking about reporting illnesses. This is where we're going to really have to communicate what it is that we expect to have happen if a case of COVID is brought to our attention, if we suspect a case of COVID and it hasn't been confirmed, if a family member contacts us and says, I've been exposed, but it was yesterday and the child was already in school. So we need to have strong protocols, and I'll be working with the Torrington Area Health District when we propose our local plan to make sure that we have those protocols in place. And then I will make certain that I educate through much communication, our parents, our staff, and then part of our professional development at the beginning of the year with our staff will also include these protocols. And then again, social distancing is a totally separate section here under health practices. And it is very clear that that is the emphasis that we need to have going into the school year next year, is we need to stay apart as much as we possibly can. Next, please. Then we go on to some exceptions for face coverings. There are only a few exceptions for wearing face coverings. Anyone who has trouble breathing, and that would be have to be identified by a medical doctor, or anyone who is unconscious, incapacitated, or otherwise unable to remove their mask without assistance. In other words, everyone will wear a cloth face covering. There is another exception, but it doesn't really apply to us in school, but I think it's worth noting. Anyone under the age of 2, according to the CDC, should not wear a face covering. The Board of Education will be purchasing masks to have, so that if a staff member or student's mask were to become soiled or lost or dirtied in some way, there would be a backup mask so that the child or staff member could remain in school for the rest of the day. Next, please. Again, this is a health monitoring plan. It's basically the written protocols that we just discussed, and this will be part of what our medical staff will work on. So that's why there are no highlights there. I'm very confident they'll manage that well. Next, please. Yes. So it's a tiered system that they're looking for in our plan. They're looking for us to be ready for a full return, as well as some kind of in-between stage, and then finally the full distance learning stage. And then we would have to have some written protocols that would be associated with how we would respond to changes in the conditions of our schools. They've also asked us in this plan to identify an isolation room in our buildings that cannot be the nurse's office, so that if someone were to exhibit symptoms, and here it's pointing to students, but it would also be for staff, that we would be able to hold those symptomatic individuals in a place that is away from everyone else. That would have to be part of that containment plan. And then, of course, how is it that we would properly dismiss these students?
I'm talking about TJ. You complain about it that time?
I just interrupt?
But you complain.
Can everyone please?
Okay.
Stacey, you can go to the next slide.
Sure. If you could please mute if you're not speaking.
I'm going to go through the rest of these just as quickly as I've gone through the others. Again, it's just a reiteration of what we need to do. insofar as how we're going to be able to instruct our students under specific community-based conditions and other indicators. And then we have to develop a plan for extended absences. Again, another indicator for the board to know that they made a very good decision tonight in allowing for the waiver so that we could purchase those webcams and get them in right away. We have a student that has to be isolated, quarantined, or is not returning to school. That may be, for those not returning to school, a little more permanent feeling than someone who needs to be quarantined or isolated. They may be gone for 2 weeks and then return. So having that camera in the classroom will allow for that consistency for that child to come in and out of circumstance of in-person versus distance learning. Next. Academics has two emphasis areas in this plan. One is special education and the other is English language learners. Under special education, they speak to what the expectations are for special needs students. As you can see here, it says if students with disabilities are unable to access the reopening plan as designed, then we have to facilitate individualized and alternative means. Again, pointing to that webcam that would allow them to access their general education instruction, which is absolutely wonderful for students who may have special needs that compromise their health, or who have special needs that will cause them to have to stay home because they cannot function with a tactile issue associated with the wearing of a face covering. Next slide is on English language learners. So if you look at the next slide, it's very similar. It emphasizes that they have to have education, educational access, and that if they are also an English language learner that has special education protocols, then we need to make sure that the student gets general ed, English language support, and special education support, which is what we have been doing all along, but it is emphasized here in this plan. Next. Lastly, we have family support. So we need to make certain that we have ongoing and clear communication. I've been trying very hard to, when I communicate with parents, to communicate on very specific issues so that I'm not putting in a very lengthy message of multiple topics that parents might have to go back to later and try to tease out where the information was that they thought I had sent. I'm also very, very happy that we have our reopening plan webpage so that any kind of announcement or information that's put out to parents, we can also put on that webpage so that in the future, parents don't have to go back to an old email to see what's going on. They can go right to that page. And I hope it turns out to be beneficial for families. And then, of course, I wanted to point out social emotional learning. We're going ahead with what we already have been doing with our social emotional learning. But our plan to the state will have to include that component. And then lastly, anything that we do during the day, if we were to have an after school program, it would have to follow the same rules as during the day. So at this point in time, knowing that we would have to cohort, after school programming has been pretty much left to the last bullet point that we're going to look at as a committee. So I'm moving on to my final slide. So the final slide speaks specifically here to career and technical education like woodshop, where the lab would have to be cleaned before and after each use. That is going to be difficult if we have back-to-back classes, but we will do what we can to make sure we develop a plan that is in alignment with expectations for the state. And then, of course, staffing and personnel. This is something that is very important to the board and for the public to hear. There may be staff who cannot return to work. Some of those staff may be currently assigned to positions where working from home could be accommodated. Other staff may be in positions where that accommodation cannot be made. We as a district need to, on a case-by-case basis, take a look at what it is that is keeping that staff member home, what accommodations we might be able to offer. And if we can't, then those staff members are going to have to be considered ill and out for the school year, which means they would have to be replaced. So what I'm looking to do in the interim right now is to start with building substitutes. We had already had a plan for next year to have one in-house building substitute. This was before COVID. It was when we were building the budget. An in-house substitute would be less expensive for our district than other types of substitute contracted services would be, because we would be able to pay the in-house substitute directly. And they would be assigned exclusively to us. Originally, that was going to be to fill the gaps that we can't seem to always fill through our current contractor for substitutes. But what I've asked my administrators to do is when they do start interviewing for this daily substitute position, that they consider the top 5 candidates and keep their names available, so that if we do end up with a number of staff, especially instructional staff, who cannot return to work, we can pull from a roster of familiar names and have them step into that role. We're going to be focusing on people that have studied in teaching. We are minimally a bachelor's degree, but we're looking for someone who is certified in teaching, who is maybe fresh out of school, or someone who needs the experience in a particular grade level, who would be interested in subbing for us. Because then if we needed that person to be a more permanent substitute, we could convert them rather quickly because they would have the proper certification, as opposed to someone with a simple bachelor's degree where they would not be able to be a long-term substitute. They couldn't work for more than 39 days in a row in any particular classroom. Also, there are 2 forms that have been developed with the board attorney and myself. One form is for parents and families to complete. That should go out sometime later this month, where I'm asking parents, are you intending to send your children back to school? Among other questions, but it's going to pretty much be collecting information about who is and who is not returning to school. If a parent is not sure, they will have the ability to send that form in at any time after the deadline to update us. But we're looking for a ballpark number of somewhere of an estimate, so that we can determine how many of any grade level we can expect to not return to school in the fall. We also have a second form, which is right now being reviewed by one of our unions, and will then be reviewed by our next union, which is going to go out to all staff at some point this month, asking them if they have either a comorbidity issue or an age-related issue that is associated with COVID that could keep them from returning to work again, so that we can have an early enough assessment of how many staff members might not be able to return, and so that we can make some determinations as to who we might move here or there. For example, if a paraprofessional is unable to return because of a comorbidity issue, and they are assigned to a student through a special education plan, individual plan, that student, we need to first check and see if their parents said, yes, they're coming back to school. If that student does return to school and that para is not returning, we need to shift around our paraprofessional staff and make certain that that student has the paraprofessional services that are part of that IEP, part of that individualized plan. Also, there'd be flexibilities that could be afforded, like I said, to some positions that couldn't be afforded to others. So for example, if we had a secretary who is a front office secretary who could not return, that would be a critical position that would need to be filled in person, whereby we may have a secretary who's not front office, but they could still do their job remotely and not have to come in on a daily basis. So all of these types of staff roster issues and student roster issues, we will be looking at over the next so many weeks, so that we can have as seamless of a transition as we can upon the beginning of the school year in the fall. So there's beyond the plan, there's a lot of other preparation that needs to be put in place. So this slide I thought was really most important to the board, because it talks about our personnel, and I wanted to overlap it to our students as well. I have finished showing you what it is that we would have to report out to the state, and I hope that I highlighted what was necessary to be highlighted. If I missed something, if you have any questions, it's my pleasure to answer at this time. There's also a statewide webinar that's being offered next week that I did send out to all parents and staff, so that if you want to hear right from the horse's mouth at the state what they think the plan components are about, I encourage you to hurry up and register, because there are only 1,000 seats available. Thank you. I'll take questions now.
Thank you, Francine. Does anyone have any questions for Mrs. Koss?
This is Jennifer. I have a question. So you were talking about the staff in terms of like secretarial and teachers. What about the janitorial staff? Because much of this plan depends on cleaning, sanitizing between things. I saw the playground equipment. How are they going to be supported? And do we have enough of them present in the building during the day to make these changes?
Okay, so a couple of questions are in there, Jen. Let me try to tease out the different questions. First off, any staff member who cannot return to work, regardless of the staff classification or category that they're in, if we need them to perform their duties in person and they can't do it in person, they will have to be substituted. A custodial substitute is a little different than a teacher substitute, but they would definitely have to be secured. As far as do we have enough staff during the day, it would really depend on what we find out is the definition of enhanced cleaning and disinfection, because right now every building has one janitor, custodial staff, excuse me, one custodian in each building during the day. We do have some overlap, which is typically around lunchtime, where one of the second shift custodians do come in and begin their shift an hour or so earlier, so that they can tackle the cafeteria before the children leave. So we may need additional custodial staff, regardless of whether staff can or cannot return to work because of the protocols that are going to be put upon us. But at a minimum, if we don't need additional staff and staff can't do in-person work and their type of work is critical to be done in person, then they will have to be substituted. And if that staff member is out and has paid leave time, we will be paying that staff member to be absent, as well as their replacement. So it could get rather costly if we have a number of staff absent for a duration of time. So that's why I think it's important that I put out this early assessment, this form, to our staff, so we can get a good handle on that. So if we need to ask, or I should say simply give notice to the town, otherwise we may have to make changes in how we run our schools if the town can't afford this increase in cost.
Francine, this is Sarah. I know that a lot of parents, just from being on Facebook, have a lot of questions about the masks. So I think what you said was that, like, if a special education student wouldn't be able to wear one, or any student for that matter, then they would have to be at home. What about breaks with masks? Is there going to be times, outside of eating, where the kids will be able to, kind of take a break?
Yeah, there was some talk in the media about mask breaks, and there's nothing in the plan that indicates what a mask break should be, other than if you're outside and you're socially distanced, you don't need a mask. If you are consuming food, you don't need a mask. So as far as what I'm seeing as plan-oriented breaks, the only time one would remove a mask is when they are outdoors and socially distanced, or when they are eating. So that looks a whole lot different than the thought, as a parent, I'm thinking, that's really not a mask break. I can't just take this off and go like, thank goodness, you have to leave that mask on. And that is something that we have to work very hard to practice. Again, for the public out there, and maybe for some of the newer board members, my world for a whole decade was kindergarten teaching. I mean, I think like a kindergarten teacher, and we need to do a lot of practicing with mask wearing. And in some cases, some children will never be able to tolerate that mask. And we have to be understanding of that. And that's why I wanted to have those cameras, so that if we're put into a position where, or a parent is put into a position where the child just cannot conform and wear that mask during the day, we have an option for instruction. I may not have an option as to who may watch that child who's at home, but I can at least provide the option for how we will instruct them. So yes, this mask protocol is going to be very, very complicated for us with the children, very complicated. Did I
Thank
answer all of what you said, Sarah? Did I respond to everything?
Yeah, I think you did. But then as we were talking, I kind of thought of something. So what if there is a child that is coming to school and is having the issues with the mask? That's probably something that we have to think about too, especially if that parent doesn't have childcare for that child in order to be staying home and doing the distance learning.
That's the protocol that we have to develop. And I'm concerned by that protocol because it may end up being so strict that it's not going to be family friendly. It's not going to be child friendly, because masks are not child friendly. So that's something that, when I talked about earlier, that I have to communicate with parents. Once we get that protocol in place and it's been approved by the state, if the protocol says these are the 3 steps that need to be taken when a child doesn't wear a mask, then those are the 3 steps we need to continue taking. And if one of those steps includes, come pick up your child, I don't see how that helps the instructional process.
I know.
But it's also not going to help the health and well-being of those that are in the classroom that might not have that protection because the child is without a mask. So there's a lot of things that I didn't even mention here that are beyond masks, like our typical habit, again, thinking like a kindergarten teacher. We used to keep all of our scissors in a bucket, and then you would walk to one side of the room, grab your scissor, or they'd be in a stand and you pull your scissor out and then, go back to your seat and start cutting. We can't do that. Everyone has to have their own little
box. Yeah.
In music class, you can't share a tambourine, a drum. You can't share any type of instrument under these conditions. We would have to either eliminate or find a way to disinfect. And anyone who understands the making of a drum knows you wouldn't want to put any kind of disinfectant on a drum. You're going to ruin the drum. So there are going to be some things that some areas, content areas that they're going to have to get very creative. Gym class right now, can't share a ball. Like I said, I'm saying right now, can't share a ball. So that's very odd. So what are we going to do? Are we going to buy a ball for 900 children so every child has their own ball throughout the district? Or are we going to find ways to pantomime the use of a ball so that we can still have action and movement? Those are creative things that I'm relying on my experts in the classroom to come up with. And I have to say, quite proudly, through all the work that we've been doing with the reopening plan, we have really amazing teachers. I knew it already, but they're blowing me away. What they think of, what they're teasing out of the demands of this plan to make sure that our kids are not left in the lurch or left feeling like they got half of a curriculum. They're blowing me away. And I hope the parents feel the same way in so many months when we start up school. It'll be different. It'll be, in some cases, really weird, but I think we'll get used to the new weird normal because the teachers have their focus in the right place. They want to make sure our children have the same education they would have gotten as best as we can get it to them in the new year, which is awesome. Awesome, awesome. It's a Thomaston thing. I can't claim it on any other level. We've got great people. Can't say it enough.
Thank you, Francine.
Yeah.
Does anybody else have any other questions right now for Francine?
So Beth, I wanted to point out that the vote was only a potential vote because we have a special meeting tonight. And for the public's understanding of what we're doing, a special meeting agenda can't be changed. We can't amend it during the meeting. So just in case the Board of Education tonight wanted to take some kind of action related to this Connecticut plan, I put on the agenda a potential action, which then you could either skip or fashion now if you so choose.
I think at this, it
Okay.
might.
This is
really-
Sal Santa Maria.
Sorry, Sal, go ahead.
I like everything. The only thing I have an exception with is the mask usage on the bus. I'm not in favor of having exceptions on the bus, and I know because if you get some smart aleck kid who goes up over there and they're like, well, I really don't have to wear a mask. I mean, if you're mandating masks in the classroom, I believe you should be mandating masks on the bus because you're only doing half of it then. And the kids are actually closer together on the bus.
Yes, we're mandating them, Sal, but the issue is really whether or not we have a monitor, which was what was being encouraged, is to put a monitor on the bus that would say, put your mask on. Whether or not you have a monitor on the bus, if the child continues to refuse to wear a mask, I'll use the example of, we pick them up on High Street. Are you going to drop them off on Main because they're being insolent and they're refusing to wear a mask? That's the concern I have about the bus. So I share your concern, just on a different plane, because we can't disembark a child from the bus in the middle of nowhere because they're not wanting to wear a mask. And we also can't expect some adult on the bus, whether it's the driver or we were to attempt to have an adult on the bus that's going to make sure everyone wears a mask, to have them to be expected to go touch the child and force a mask onto the child. That is not appropriate. So they have to wear a mask on the bus. I'm looking at ways where we can practice that. But if someone were to remove a mask, there really is no recourse. The bus driver can't just stop and say, get out, you non-mask wearing child. They have to take the child all the way to school or all the way home. So that's really going to be the problem, I think, Sal, is if there's no compliance on the bus, there'll be contamination that way. And then again, if there's no compliance in the classroom, it's the same problem.
Right. So, but you can't just let them take the mask off. And I mean, I know what you're saying, stuff like this, because you can't go over there and like strap a belt onto his face with a mask. But at the same time, there has to be some kind of repercussions if they refuse to wear a mask.
That would be what we'd be
Because
putting.
it'll just grow.
That's going to be in our protocol. So our protocol would include incidents of not wearing your mask. And however many incidents you're caught not wearing your mask would result in some action. So the bus is an incident. The classroom is an incident. So it would be a way of saying progressively, if you don't wear your mask, this is what's going to happen next. If you don't wear your mask again, this is what's going to happen next, until ultimately they could be asked, and I don't have confirmation of this, but they could be asked to do something very drastic, like you can't come to school until you comply because you're putting other people.
Be honest, that should be the way it is. Why should everyone else comply except for a few other people are just being smart, smart alecks?
I understand, but again, if the state doesn't allow us to do that, that's a whole other story. Hence why I wanted to make sure we had those cameras, because if the flexibility is allowed and they say to us, well, you have to prove that you can give instruction at the same time, I can now prove it because we have classroom cameras that will allow for instruction to happen almost simultaneous to when it's happening in person. So I'm looking at all of those levels of flexibility, but yes, I understand. But if the state says, no, you can't throw a child out, it could be that we do it through discipline, where you would use more formal discipline, like even a suspension. But it could also be that there's going to be some kind of CDC guidance or some kind of State Department of Ed guidance that would say, once this happens, you have the right to keep that child isolated from everyone else. And what isolation means, I'm uncertain right now, but we are to be getting some of those blanks filled in over the next couple of weeks by the state.
Francine, this is Sarah again.
Is that correct?
I couldn't hear who was.
Are there cameras on the bus now? I thought all buses had cameras now. Is that true or not true? I don't remember.
They have cameras, yes.
Okay.
So we would very easily be able to show someone who's doubting that the child wasn't wearing a mask, that they were wearing a mask.
Right.
If they've tilted their head out of the side of the seat, because our seats are much taller now than when you and I were on a bus. And so the shorter children, you cannot see their heads. So you would not know if they've removed the mask.
Right.
Francine, what about if we had videos showing people wearing masks on a bus and in a classroom, just so that the kids could see it and get used to it and, view it as many times as they wanted to before coming to school?
Yeah, I'm looking at different ways of orienting people, both through video and through live trials. Like, let's practice riding on the bus with a mask. We do our little bus ride for kindergarten. I am contemplating doing that for more than just our kindergarten, so that kids can get used to the funkiness of wearing a mask, or kind of like the goofiness, like, you have a red mask, I have a polka dotted mask. Let that all get done. Let it get done when we're doing our practice, and then it'll just become old hat. We need to practice. The more we do it, the less likely we're going to have a problem. And because most of our kids are not traveling with us to the grocery store because they're discouraging us to bring our children, they may not be used to wearing a mask at all, because we're keeping them home, or we're not bringing them to public places where they have to wear them. As the summer goes on, as different parks open up, they will get more and more mask practice. But we've got to get them to have mask practice with their friends. That's what we need. We need them to practice that.
Okay, well, thank you.
Does anybody else have any other questions or discussion?
I would just like to add to what Sal was talking about. I'm hoping that there's not going to be a couple chances given to a child that's going to purposely try to harm other students by not wearing a mask. That's something we should really think about.
Okay. I want you to know that I'm proposing to the policy committee to add to our dress code the wearing of masks, so that it's going to be clear in our policy that masks are expected to be worn until otherwise indicated. Because I do suspect that we're not going to be wearing masks only for a couple of months. I suspect we're going to be wearing masks for quite a good long time.
And that would be in August, yes, and we would have to fast track that.
Yes, we could either have a special meeting in the month of July, or we could do it during our regular meeting in August. And I would be requesting a fast track. And again, for the public that are listening, a fast track would mean typical change in policy. You would have a first read where everybody can see that change, and then a second read where everybody could still see that change and think about it or give input on it. And then there would be the final vote. If we fast track, we would just post that change and then vote on it, because it is that urgent that we would need to make sure that it happens that way. So it may be that when we meet next to approve the plan that we're sending to the state, that I would be asking for minimally a first read, if not a fast track of that policy, so that we can get it into our handbook before school starts.
Okay.
And that is the trend for most of the districts in the area, by the way. We are all trending toward putting mask wearing in our dress code policy. So that should give some more teeth to the argument, Frank, that you're presenting, that, we would have a dress code violation as well, that we could discipline in a different way. And then, of course, too, if the child is just going to be defiant, well, there are other types of discipline that we offer to students who choose to be defiant. But if it's a child who has a tactile issue, or a child who has a breathing issue, or a child who has some other type of issue, we would have to take that on a case-by-case basis and determine if the child is just never going to be able to comply because of their own personal issues that they cannot manage. Just as a point of note, there are clear masks that we will be purchasing for the teachers that teach students who need to lip read, so that they can still keep up their, still hone their craft and still understand and communicate what it is the teacher is saying, because the mask will be clear and you could still see the teacher's lips. So I want you to know we're contemplating all kinds of things. So even if someone were to say, oh no, you can't wear a mask because of this reason, we're ready with reasons why you still have to wear a mask. So even our teachers are going to have these different modifications so that our students can continue to get the instruction that they need and still be able to engage in the way that they did before masks.
Thank you. My feeling is that tonight it's not appropriate. It might be premature to make any kind of motion on this until we have a solid plan set in place. So that would be my recommendation to the board. But if anyone has any more questions for Francine or comments, please feel free.
This is Roxy. I agree with you, Beth. This is a potential action on the Connecticut plan, and that really doesn't offer us anything other than what it says. We need to get our own plan, and that's what I think we should approve, not this one.
Right. Thank you, Roxy.
We're looking at the week of the 13th or the week of the 20th of this month to bring the Thomaston plan to the Board of Education for their review and formal approval. It's not required that you approve it. It's just required that we submit it by the 24th of July. So that's why I'm looking at either the week of the 13th or the week of the 20th. That will be really determined by how long it takes for us to complete our end of the work, as well as the Torrington Area Health District completing their approval process to make certain that what we've put into place is appropriate for what is considered healthy practices at this time. So that's why I'm leaving it open. So anyone who's watching in the public, there may be a special meeting posted either one of those weeks where you would see our plan.
Thank you, Francine.
Thank you.
Anybody else? We'll do a last call for comments before we adjourn. Okay, can we have a motion to adjourn, please?
Frank Triglia, I will make a motion to adjourn.
There a second?
Sarah,
Can we
Ethier,
have a
I'll
second?
second.
Okay, any opposed? Same? Okay, thank you, everyone. Have a good night.
Thank you, Beth.
Thank you.
Thank you, Stacy.